Hi everyone, welcome back to Brookdale Farm. Well, we've got the Chamberlain tractor hooked up to our seeder bar. We're just going to do a bit of maintenance on our bar, ready to get it ready for seeding. We're not going to do a huge amount to this this year. It does need a fair amount of work, but we are hoping to do a somewhat major rebuild to it next year. Before seeding next year. But I will take you through all the things that we need to check and what to look for in the wear, and how to assess how bad it is, and what you need to do for maintenance before you start seeding with your seeder bar. The first thing we are going to check is the wheel bearings on it. So we've got 4 wheels on this. We need to check all the wheel bearings, but also this bearing in here that's on the walking beam. Now this is a pretty slow moving bearing. It never does more than about 1/3 of a rotation, so it's pretty slow wearing. But we'll lift it up and just check all of these to begin with. Now I'm just going to start the hydraulics, start the tractor, and we will lift this up on the hydraulics so that we can get a really good look at all of this. Okay, so we've got these wheels up off the ground now, and we can have a good look at the wheel bearings. Now all we need to do, make sure they spin freely, and well, this one's actually a bit loose. You can see I'm just wobbling the wheel around there, and that's telling me that that bearing is a bit loose. So we're going to have to take that apart, clean up the bearings, repack it, well, assess the bearings, probably repack them with grease, and they should be good for another year, because we're not doing that many acres. Just check this one as well. That wheel there has no movement in it and turns nicely, so that bearing is fine. This walking beam, we just want to do the same thing. Actually, that back bearing's a bit loose on this too. So we're going to need to take this cap off and wash out, clean up that bearing, repack it, and probably just put it back in for the moment. So we've got a little bit of work to do on this side here. Okay, so we know that this bearing in here is probably worn out. But this was originally a 40-foot bar, so it's only got, and I've taken the 2 wings off it, which means this bearing only has about 1/3 of the weight on it that it used to have. So we're just going to open this up, take the cap off, take the protector off, and probably just tighten this, have a look, see if it needs a bit more grease in it, and just tighten this bearing up for this year. Next year we'll go through and redo all of these. But because we've got such a small bar on it now, and the weight's been reduced so much, these bearings don't have the load on them that they used to have, particularly when it was being transported up and down the road or between paddocks. Well, it's got a nice lot of reasonably fresh looking grease in it, so we'll just whip this split pin out in here. It looks a bit drier in there actually, so we might just take the bearing out, put some grease on it, and reassemble it. Looks like somebody may have just put some under the cap here. I think I've just broken the split pin. Somebody's already broken the other half of the split pin. Now we have jacked this up so we've got no weight on here at the moment. Yeah, that bearing is a little bit dry inside. You can see it's got a little bit of rust on the inside there. So we will just wash that out, repack it, put it back in. That bearing race is a bit rough in there on the bottom, but we're not going to change that this year. Now we've cleaned out the bearings. This one's still a pretty good bearing, even though the cup is a bit worn. We need to re-grease this. Now you can get special tools for re-greasing these, for pumping grease right through the bearing, but we want to make sure that we get grease right inside it. So the best way to do this, you get a bit messy unfortunately doing it. Take a glob of grease and put it on your hand. Hold the bearing between your fingers and you just want to keep working that grease, working the bearing through the grease, working those rollers around, getting as much grease into that bearing as possible. We can also get some in that groove there and fill all of that section up just by sort of scraping it across our hand. Turn it a bit more and just keep working it in until you think the bearing is completely full of grease. The better you pack the bearing with grease, the longer the bearing is going to last. But you do end up covered in grease. It's also not a good idea to try and operate a camera while you're doing this, because your camera also gets covered in grease. Now that looks pretty good. We've got a fair bit of grease in there. We could probably get a little bit more in this back groove here. But that bearing should last us at least this season till we get round to redoing this bar next season. So we did take the rear bearing off as well and re-grease that. We've packed a bit of grease in the back there. We're going to put a bit of grease in the front on the inner cone. Now we need to try and get this back on there. Next, the bearing goes in. And the nut and the washer go back on. Now we just want to tighten that nut up enough that there's no sideways movement in the bearing. That's pretty good there. And that we can get the split pin back through the hole. Now we can fit the split pin alternative back in. Just tap that down a bit so it fits. A little bit more grease in here. Don't really need too much in here at the moment because we're going to be pulling it apart again reasonably soon. Cap goes back on. Last of all, this little keeper goes back on. This just stops any rocks knocking the cap off when you're seating. And we'll just go through the same process with the wheel bearing as well. One of the other things that we need to keep an eye on and check is the drawbar points. Now this cedar bar has done an awful lot of work over its life, and this hole here should be a round hole, so it should be filled in across there. It's worn all the way out to here. Now this ball in here should actually swivel, but it's well seized up in there. And that's not a particular problem that's seized up. But if we let this wear much further, it's going to start wearing into this, and then it gets much harder to fix. So we're going to whip this off. It's only one bolt holding it on. And we're just going to fill this back in with weld. The other thing about this is that you can see that this bit down here is narrower than this bit here, because they've actually been using a pin in here that's just a little bit on the small side. So as long as you check these and catch them in time, it's not hard to fix them up. It's just a matter of taking them off and doing the work. So I'm going to whip this off now, and that way we can get it fixed up. Okay, so we've welded this back up. It's just as well we did, because we were just starting to wear on here as well. The other thing we did was free up the ball, so it moves now. And we've turned it round, so we're pulling, well, this is the side here that had worn through and we repaired. We're now pulling on the opposite side here. That's like a new surface. There's nothing wrong with pulling on your welded side, but it just takes a little while. It's a bit rough in there, and I haven't bothered to file it down too much, so that just will wear your pin a little bit if you're pulling on the weld, without just cleaning that up a little bit better than we have. So we are now going to refit this back onto the front here so that we can do the next bits. So when we're refitting it, we're just going to put a bit of grease on this bit of the bolt here. That's been rusting. Surprisingly, it's not badly worn, but a bit of grease will just help keep the moisture out of there and stop it rusting. And we can go right up on the threads as well. The next thing we want to check on our cedar bar is, we'll start at the bottom. All the points on this one are worn out and need to be changed. So this one has a slip-on point with a pin up the top here that holds it in place. Pull that pin out, get all the dirt and mud out, and it just drops out. It makes them very easy to change and quite easy to lose if you're not careful about putting them on properly. Now we have this part here, which is a point holder. There's two bolts, you can see the back end of them down here, that go right through the point holder, the tine and the closing plate to hold it in place. So we just want to make sure that our point holder isn't too loose. This one's a tiny bit loose. Sometimes you can tighten these bolts up, but they do tend to rust up. So we'll see if we can tighten this one, or whether we need to put some new bolts in it. The other thing that you want to look at is, get right down under here. This closer plate here has a piece of tungsten steel on it. This is a very, very hard metal, and it stops the closer plate wearing out. If that tungsten is worn out, you need to change. You can get new little plates to go on here that you weld on, or most people just change the whole assembly here. Those assemblies aren't cheap, so you're better off just trying to get the plate or a bit of hard facing with your welder down in there. Once we've looked and worked out that all of them are good, we want to go up and have a look at our bushes up the top end here and our springs. Now I know these ones are worn out. This is part of the rebuild for next year, hopefully. But usually, whatever make you've got, there's a bush in there and usually a bush back up here. You just want to give the tine a bit of a wriggle, and this one has steel bushes, so they can actually get quite badly worn before they do any damage. Some of the other ones have a very, very thin neoprene bush in them, and as soon as you wear out that neoprene bush, you start wearing the pins and the tine holder and all of that sort of stuff, and it gets very, very expensive if you let them go for too long. It is a pretty major job overhauling your tine assembly, so just keep an eye on them and make sure they're not getting too bad. Now this is the style of point we are using. It's a knife point because it sort of cuts the ground and just opens up a narrow little spot. In reality, it rips the ground rather than cuts it. These are these are a good point. They're about 60 bucks each for these. They've got a pin up the top here. They just knock on and knock off. Now this is a reasonably good second-hand one. I've got a bundle of good second-hand ones. They are about that long when they're new. I'm just going to put on my good second-hand ones for the time being. I was a little bit lucky with these. This one is one I've just taken off. It's the worst one on the machine. These are tungsten faced as well to stop them wearing. The tungsten on this one is missing, and that is worn a bit too far. I was a bit lucky to get away with that one. Most of them aren't quite that bad. One thing that I really like about these points is they have this boot on here that protects the bottom end of the point holder on your tine here. Now I have never seen these before until I got this cedar. Most points are like this one here. They've got this little raised section here, but once you wear the point down too far, it wears your point holder very badly, and then you not only need to change your point, but you also have to change the point holder because it's worn out. So I really like these, but I haven't come across them anywhere else, and I bet they're expensive. You can get points reconditioned, so probably for next year I will look into getting all of these points reconditioned so that we've got a virtually new set on the machine. Okay, so to change these points, we've got to pull out this split pin here, and they're usually seized in. Then we want to pull this pin out here, which is just a little T-pin with a hole in it. Knock the point out. These are usually held in pretty tightly with all the mud and dirt and stuff. Unless, of course, your pin falls out, then they quite happily drop out in the paddock. Once we've got the point out, I like to just clean up in here a little bit and get some of the dirt out. This just makes it a bit easier to slide the new point in. You don't need to get it all out, just make it easier. Then to reassemble, it's a simple matter of sliding the point back on, putting your T-pin back through, and a nice new shiny split pin in there. So these points are very quick and easy to change, which is great when you're doing big acreages. It doesn't matter so much on a small farm. Coming to the back of the machine here where the press wheels are, we also want to go through, just give them all a spin, make sure that the bearings in them are okay. These blow bearings somewhat frequently. I have found I've started putting a grease nipple on the inside of them when I replace the bearings now. This means they always end up with water in the bearings and stuff like that. With the grease nipple, it just means you can put a bit of extra grease in and push that water out at the end of the season and at the beginning of the next season. And I've been having a lot more luck with the bearings lasting a bit longer. The last thing we need to do is go through and check all of our hoses. Now I put new pipe down on here last year and new pipes around here, so they're all pretty good. I know that they're good. We've then got our distributor heads and risers. Now these wear quite badly on the bottom corner here. With the fertilizer coming through, it's a bit like a sandblaster, and it just wears through this steel here. So you can see this one's already had a dodgy patch welded on it before I bought it. So you just want to check, make sure you don't have holes in there. Check and make sure your distributor heads are all right and don't have holes in them anywhere. One very important thing to check is that you still have the cap on top of your distributor head. Now this is a rubber cap. It's a soft rubber cap, so when the seed comes blasting up from underneath, it doesn't hit anything too hard up here. But it's pretty easy for these caps to blow off, and then you don't get any seed coming out through any of your pipes off this distributor head. And that can really stuff up your crop. So even when you're seeding, you need to keep a close eye on these. I tape mine on to make sure they don't come off, but they do still sometimes come off, and the parrots come and pick all the tape off as well. So check these, check all of these hoses, and you need to keep checking them when you're seeding to make sure that they haven't come off down this end here. And we also, once we hook it up to the air cart, we'll make sure that there's air coming out the bottom of all of these, and that there's no blocks in here, because there could be a block from last year, but also the spiders make nests, the rats make nests, or the mice make nests in them, and quite often you find that these have blocked up. So now our seeder bar is almost ready to use. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this little video, and I hope some of you find it useful. See you next time. Bye.